So the biggest plot twist, or one of the biggest plot twists in the series just happened. Obviously in the last chapter, it ended with Sukuna seeing a vision of Gojo in the distance, and ever since then, so many theories, questions, and opinions have been made, but of those many speculations, one turns out to be true, and that is Yuta taking over Gojo's body while using Kenjaku's innate curse technique. We're gonna get into all the discussions while covering the leaks, so without wasting any more time, let's get straight into it. The chapter begins with Yuji deciding that he will crush Sukuna's heart. We also see that Yuji is reminded of Chozo in the middle of this, and it fuels Yuji to really try and end Sukuna's gauntlet once and for all. Though, continuing back from what we saw in the last chapter, as soon as Sukuna chants domain expansion, he sees Gojo standing in disbelief. Sukuna wonders if it's really him, but pushes away that thought as he says it's impossible for Gojo to appear here. However, Sukuna suddenly realizes who it is and punches Yuji away as he moves forward and says, "I apologize for underestimating you. I didn't know you were capable of going that far, Yuta Okotsu." That is right, Sukuna addresses Gojo as Yuta, and he's like screaming in a way where he's shocked but also thrilled to see the lengths, capabilities, and potential of Yuta's power. In the next page, we get a flashback of the 1 month time skip. Yuta decides to have Rika devour Kenjaku and copy his curse technique, which will allow Yuta to change bodies. Maki objects to this plan, but Hikari says that he has one condition. They are going to use this plan once everyone's wiped out and when they don't have any more options on the battlefield. This also confirms one of the criterias for Yuta to copy someone else's curse technique, where Rika does indeed need to consume a body part of the person that they are trying to copy. We did see it with Uro and the last finger of Sukuna, but in this chapter, it's said for the first time by Yuta himself, so it finally acts as that confirmation. I say it's one of the criterias because we also saw that Yuta copied Inumaki's curse technique, and I don't think Rika ever consumed a body part of Inumaki unless it was off-screen, unless it was like more of a blood connection rather than a body part, or unless it's just volume 0 logic, because I know a lot of people in the community, they think that certain feats, details, or whatever that's shown in volume 0 shouldn't be taken too seriously sometimes, since originally Gege didn't plan to have a sequel after volume 0 when he wrote it. Regardless, Maki asks, since Yuta can use the copy curse technique for only 5 minutes, then what would happen later? Yuta says he doesn't know, and that's a really good question because in the past, Yuta has only ever copied techniques that give him an extra ability, but copying a technique that goes into someone else's body and therefore copies their technique, like how does the rule of his 5-minute timer come into play? Does it get avoided because Kenjaku's technique is related to the body and soul being one and the same? Does that somehow interfere with the mechanics? It's crazy to think about because there's 3 things being copied at the same time. First, it's Yuta copying Kenjaku's technique, and then Kenjaku's technique inhabiting Gojo's body, which then allows Yuta to further copy Gojo's technique. Yeah, it's a bit of a mess, but hey, it makes sense. Yuta says that he knows this is a last resort, so first, he will try to fight Sukuna with his own domain, which we've already seen, and if he can't win, then he'll accept Gojo's body. Now, some of you might think it's weird how they're assuming Gojo to die during the time skip, but that's not true. All this planning is regarding the possibility if Gojo were to die in his fight against Sukuna, and I can understand how it may look odd for people since, you know, Gege formats these flashbacks to occur when it's relevant to the situation, but please keep in mind that the crew initially believed in Gojo winning. Kusakabe says it's a good plan, but it's just not humane. Yuta responds saying, "What do you mean humane? We are about to fight the history's strongest jujutsu sorcerer. If we can win just by throwing away our humanity, then we shouldn't even be arguing about this." And to me, this just calls out to the people who think that taking over Gojo's body isn't right, because like, bro, at the end of the day, actually, you know what? I'll save this discussion for the end of the video. Moving on, Yuta asks if everyone's afraid of becoming some monster to fight Sukuna. Maki rebukes Yuta, saying that everyone is just concerned about him. Yuta says, "What about Gojo Sensei? Is he not important? Haven't we all been pushing the burden of becoming a monster onto Gojo Sensei alone? If Gojo Sensei is gone, then who else will be the monster? If no one intends to become one, then I will." And everyone is surprised to hear Yuta's Yuta's response. The once shy kid who was afraid has spoken loudly in the courtroom, taking a step forward to put everyone's minds into perspective. The scene then switches. Yuta tells Gojo that he will take his body if he dies. Gojo says he's fine with that. He says that he has no intention of losing and doesn't care what happens to his dead body. Yuta and Gojo talks about if Yuta is a descendant of Fujiwara or Sugawara, and this is obviously because Uro kept calling Yuta a Fujiwara during the culling game, when in Volume 0, Gojo said that Yuta was a Sugawara, making him and Gojo long-distance relatives. And yeah, that's still true. If I remember correctly, it was either in a Volume Extra or a popularity poll where Gege or one of his editors said that Uro just has a tendency to call all the guys that annoy her as a Fujiwara. I would assume that ties into her deep hatred of the clan. But anyways, Gojo says Yuta might have been born under better circumstances than him. So Gojo says if Yuta can't utilize that advantage, he's totally lame. Let's start off with your sloppy cursed energy. I've always told you to be careful about that. Wow, what a tie back to Volume 0. This panel in general kind of feels nostalgic with the original crew, Yuta, Inumaki, Panda, Maki, and Gojo all together. But then Gojo asks his students to go away because he doesn't want to see a bloody side of him, especially since Gojo himself doesn't know if what he's about to do is right. And yeah, in this moment, what he ends up doing is killing the higher-ups, confirming that he massacred them, which again, I know that was kind of implied earlier, but this chapter fully confirms it. Gojo once again tells his students to go back, but they refuse him. Yuta tells Gojo to not try to become a monster by himself again. Gojo says, "I'm sorry, that's something I can't do. At that moment, I was left behind. I have to catch up to him." Wow, so it appears like the story is really emphasizing the whole monster thing in this chapter. I know in chapter 220, Shoko also said how a bunch of these monsters, his students, are awaiting his return. And hey, I mean, wasn't it stated that you can't be a jujutsu sorcerer without being just a little bit crazy? And Gojo saying that he has to catch up to Geto in that sort of sense is honestly surprising, but very fitting. The scene then switches to Amai explaining his curse technique. Amai can amplify the sugar within himself and output it in some kind of way. Shoko puts Amai in the medical team with Nita as support by having him supply their brains with some sugar using his curse technique. So this also explains how Amai was able to save Angel back in chapter 220. He created like this huge jello to soften her landing, and apparently the kanji for Amai is related to jello or candy, so it's nice to get that revealed and see him having a purpose during this Sukuna fight. But the scene then switches to when Yuta got cut in half by Sukuna's slash and was rushed to the medical ward. Urata uses his curse technique to avoid Yuta's wounds from getting worse. He did the same thing for Yuji and Nobara back in Shibuya. Yuta says he's conscious thanks to Rika, but he's starting to reach his limit. Shoko tells Yuta that she has already stitched up Gojo's corpse, so once Yuta switches, he has to activate reverse curse technique at maximum capacity and complete the body. Alright, so if it wasn't told enough in the story, Shoko stitching up Gojo's corpse for Yuta, this just has to confirm again that Gojo is dead and he is not coming back. Returning to the present, it's Sukuna versus Yuta in Gojo's body. Both open their domain expansion. Naruto says that Gojo had already shown the solution to Sukuna's open barrier domain, so the chapter ends with Sukuna using Malevolent Shrine because again, he had recovered his burnout curse technique in the last chapter, and Yuta using Gojo's unlimited void. Editor's comment at the end of chapter 261. The revenge match begins. Wow. What an ending, what a chapter. This has got to be one of the craziest and biggest moments to happen in Shonen this year. Now, because this is just a simple spoiler coverage, I will go more in depth regarding the contents and my own thoughts for the chapter review this weekend, but what I will briefly say right now is that I think this outcome was great. I've been seeing people say that, this is a disservice to Gojo, how it's a character assassination, how they're using him like a tool, an object, there's no respect, and I just can't see it that way.